This makes me so sad, but uh, this makes me so sad, but it's so obvious. It's so obvious. This makes me so sad.
Let me unpack that a little bit. So, first of all, their current status, were they separated?
Correct.
They were separated, I read, for 13 months, so they weren't living with each other. How much was he seeing the kids?
Almost not at all. Actually, not at all.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because she told him it was better that they needed to work on their marriage and needed to keep their family together, but that everything was better off with him not in the home and not communicating with the children.
If you can, why were they separated? What was the catalyst?
I probably shouldn't go into that. That's pretty private.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just say they had a difference of opinion about their family.
Parenting? I know you.
Okay, so just to reiterate, to restate, Jody Hildebrandt, through her counseling, was breaking marriages apart. And then moving in on the wives romantically. Okay? I just want to restate that. Allegedly. That's what the allegations are.
Can't talk about it, but is it that kind of where we're going?
Correct.
Okay. So let me
and their own personal dynamic.
Okay. So he was living separate from her. Was he calling the kids? Because I think what a lot of people are looking at this and they're wondering, well, what did he know? So he might have been living separately from her for 13 months, but he wasn't calling the kids, checking in on the kids, seeing how they're doing? He's the father.
I totally understand that. That was the big question on my mind and the big question on a lot of people. If you've read everything that's in the media, he's getting raked over the coals for that. But
well, why don't you get some testimony from Chad? The one you sent off, not you, obviously, the attorney, but the one that Kevin and Ruby sent off to a wilderness retreat and then made sleep on a beanbag in the open space of your living room for 7 months. Why aren't you getting, he's an adult now. Why aren't you getting some testimony from him?
What people don't understand is that he was trying to preserve his marriage. He was taking direction from her. She's the one who asked him to leave the house and indicating that in order for him to be able to get back together with her and be a family, that she was requesting that he leave the home and that he not contact them or the children. Later told him that everything was blissful at home. It was so much better without him.
All right, so I don't know if any of you noticed it. I'm noticing some of you in the comments picked up on it. I would be willing to bet $100,000 that when they talk about parenting differences, one of the differences is going to be the extreme use of sexual shame to shame the children. I guarantee you that Chad sleeping on a beanbag for 7 months was about more, this is their son Chad, was about more than Chad playing some pranks. I guarantee you that their son Chad had been sexually shamed for engaging in normative teenage behaviors, and he, based on Jody's recommendations and practices.
Yeah, because Jody also says that they can't close the bathroom door. This makes me so sad because, I raised a little boy who became an adult, and I can't even imagine doing this to him. This is so sad to me, that he's putting it in this perspective that this is terrifying. That you would do this to your kid, that you would do this to your husband. This is terrifying.
And Ruby would be partly responsible for this. Chad was sleeping on a beanbag because he was caught, caught masturbating or looking at porn. I'd be willing to bet $100,000 that there's truth in that statement. I would also be willing to bet that Chad, the son Chad, being sent to a nature rehabilitation group or center, whatever it was called, that therapeutic nature wilderness survival treatment facility that he was sent to. I guarantee you, from the parents' perspective, it was in part out of the Mormon Church's teachings on sex and sexual shame. And in fact, I watched a video clip, maybe it's an audio clip, where Ruby actually states that she knew that her son Chad was going to end up in prison for life if she didn't get more serious and punishing in the way that she parented.
This bitch had 6 kids. She had 6 kids, and she's coming down on her eldest son, her youngest son, and her husband as being sexual deviants, when women needed to reproduce as much as possible. I can't even. They need to be in jail for the rest of their or prison for the rest of their lives. These 2 women are fucking disgusting.
Chad, and I guarantee, where in the world would Ruby come up with the idea that Chad was going to end up in prison? And I guarantee you, it's the slippery slope of bad sexual thoughts, porn and masturbation leads to sex, which is the sin next to murder, and you may as well be abusing children, which is going to lead Chad to be in prison. I would be willing to bet $100,000 that these dynamics are at play in Ruby's relationship with Chad and in Ruby's relationship with Kevin. There were also reports that Chad's either bedroom or bathroom door was removed, and there are reports of Ruby saying that children didn't deserve privacy. Again, that was all based on this fear and paranoia that kids would commit the sin next to murder. Finally, when you hear Kevin's lawyer or attorney talking about parenting differences and a personal dynamic between Kevin and Ruby, I can guarantee you that these issues of sexual shame were at play, which were partly what led, again, to Kevin being kicked out of the home and being alienated from his children. All right. There are other clips in this video that I'm going to skip. It basically talks about Kevin's attorney saying that Kevin had no idea that the kids were being mistreated, that Kevin didn't even know that the kids had been taken to Ivins, Utah. We'll see if that's true, but that's what Kevin is alleging through his attorney. Let's go ahead and jump to the point where Kevin's attorney talks about Jody Hildebrandt's role in the marriage.
Wow.
What does he say about Jody Hildebrandt?
That she's manipulated him in conjunction with Ruby, that she's been kind of the spearhead toward essentially destroying his life and destroying his family.
How did Jody and Ruby get connected? Does Kevin know?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Is Kevin believing that perhaps it was Jody who was manipulating Ruby in this? Or because it also sounds like Kevin feels he was manipulated by Ruby. Is it just all the blame on Jody?
I think it was a team effort, but with Jody being the spearhead and creating a situation that's just caused all of this destruction of his family.
Why does he believe that Jody is manipulative? What makes him believe that?
I probably shouldn't go into that, but we recently reviewed on another website an interview with Jody's niece, who described to the public exactly what she had done.
That's Mormon stories.
What Jody had done to the niece and her family, and we're hearing other information that she's done this to a number of families. And it wasn't until this all came to light that Kevin came to realize that his family had also been victimized by Jody.
All right, so there it is, reporting that Jody was the spearhead, that she had been victimizing others. Again, I want you to refer you to Jesse Hildebrandt's amazing Mormon Stories podcast interview. We'll include that in the show notes, as well as Adam Paul Steed's interview on the Mormon Stories podcast, because you really can't understand this whole story without hearing Adam and Jesse's story. But Jody Hildebrandt definitely was the spearhead. Let's see. He goes on to say that Kevin was really not in touch with the kids by Ruby and Jody's request. He mentions...
Which is utterly disgusting. You know, I've known many men who have just left their families because they're like, I don't know, mom doesn't like me anymore. Therefore, I've got to abandon the whole family. You were a part of creating that child. And you have a responsibility. You can't just like walk away like that. I mean, even when I laid down some ground rules for visitation rights, I didn't expect that my ex-husband would just fucking walk off and be gone for like 5 fucking years before I had to track him down again and be like, hey, by the way, you have this kid. You have a kid.
That Kevin was disconnected from the family. Let me go ahead and play the clip about the claims that the children were engaged in some sort of abuse.
I'm sure you know that there was a hearing last week where Ruby Franke, and I believe it was over Zoom, she made quite the allegations. She said that one of her children was abusing another one of the children, was abusing cousins and neighbors. That is quite...
So you see where she's going with this. She's attacking every single male in the family and calling them a sexual deviance. I don't know what the hell shit she is accusing them of, because when pressed in court, she couldn't provide any evidence. This is terrifying that she and Jody can just ruin people like that. And it's the people closest to her. Like, why would she want to do that?
Claim. What is your client's take on that?
Well, because it occurred during juvenile court proceedings, the reporter who snuck into the proceedings and reported that damaged these children and this family even more. It was despicable what they did in reporting that. And, because again, I have an agreement with the court that I won't speak about the children, and particularly won't speak about proceedings that occurred in the confines, the sanctified confines of that juvenile court. I'm not going to comment on that.
Two things I want to say about that, based on my experience within Mormon culture. The Mormon Church's obsession with pathologizing normative, masturbation as an addiction and as a sin next to murder makes it so porn and masturbation are constantly discussed in Mormon families, in Mormon households, and in Mormon churches. That makes kids and teens and adults think more about porn and masturbation because it's constantly discussed. Mormon kids, I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed on Mormon Stories who didn't even know, who learned what masturbation was by their Mormon bishop, who would sit alone with them when they were 12 or 13 and ask them if they masturbated. And the Mormon parents hadn't even discussed masturbation with their kids. They heard about and learned about masturbation for the first time when their Mormon bishop asked them alone in a room. So imagine a 12-year-old girl, Mormon girl, alone with the bishop, and the bishop asks the 12-year-old girl alone in the room, do you masturbate? And then she says, what's that? And then the Mormon bishop goes on to tell her what it means. That's how many Mormon kids are introduced to the topic of masturbation by the church, by their bishop. And so if the Mormon church is constantly talking about and striking fear into the hearts of their parents and children about porn and masturbation, it's on the minds of the parents and the kids all the time. So you've got the Mormon doctrine and theology establishing that foundation, and then bishops referring their teens and their adults to therapists like Jody Hildebrandt to get treatment, and then Jody Hildebrandt just builds on that, makes millions of dollars, and terrorizes the youth and the adults. That's the con here. That's what's at play. And I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but the Mormon church creates the problem by making sex and sexual shame an obsession, so that actually porn and masturbation use are probably more prevalent per capita in Mormon culture than outside of Mormon culture. There have been reports by companies like Pornhub that per capita, Utah leads the nation in per capita porn use. And I guarantee you it's in part because of the Mormon church's obsession with talking about porn and masturbation from the time kids are 2 and 3. So if in the Franke home there were kids who were looking at pornography at ages 3 or 4, which is what Ruby apparently claimed in her trial, if that's happening, it's got to be in part because the Mormon church and Jody Hildebrandt and the Frankes are constantly fearing it and talking about it in the family. And so whatever, that's a huge problem, and that could explain some of the sexual dysfunction within the Franke family. And the only other thing I'll say is Jody Hildebrandt used alleging sexual impropriety on others as a weapon. And so if any kid disagreed with Jody, or any adult or husband disagreed with Jody, she would say, you're living a lie, you're living in distortion, you're probably a sex addict, or you're probably an addict of some kind. And again, Adam Steed discussed this. And so the fact that sexual shame would be weaponized to the point where Ruby would accuse her own children of being abusive kids or predators or whatever, that's totally on brand with Jody Hildebrandt's form of Mormon therapy, is sort of this witch hunt of seeing addicts everywhere, of seeing sex addicts everywhere. Because even to have a thought, according to Adam Steed, his report of Jody Hildebrandt, even to have a sexual thought is to be a sexual addict sort of in embryo. Now, it is also possible that their 5 or 10-year-old kid is guilty of some sort of abuse. But what type of environment would create kids that are abusing at the ages of 5 or 8 or 10? And again, all of this could be made up in a total fabrication of Jody and Ruby's paranoid, sex-obsessed mind. So I do not want to communicate that the kids are actually guilty of any of these allegations. It's more likely that these are distortions in the minds of Jody and of Ruby and false allegations than it is that these are actual factual allegations. So I think that's a really important thing to mention. The attorney goes on to basically say that the reporting that outs the kids is despicable. And I think he would probably agree. He can't disparage Ruby, but I think he would probably claim that her allegations against her own kids are despicable as well. The video ends with Kevin's attorney talking about steps that Kevin's going to be taking to get his kids back, whether or not he is going to be named as a criminal defendant, which the attorney doesn't know at this point. And he ends by saying that Kevin has never shown any violent behavior, that he's working to get custody. And he ends by saying that Kevin is a victim of psychological and mental manipulations. And if you look at Jody Hildebrandt's track record, I think there's going to be some credibility to that. So I would like to summarize what we've learned today. First of all, I want to just sort of summarize the questions that we've hopefully answered today. So we asked, what factors possibly contributed to Ruby's neuroticism? I guarantee you that Ruby, the social media exacerbated it. The constant need to exploit your children for clicks and views contributed to it. The constant need of social media to give more and more sensationalistic content contributed to it. I am going to add that the missing ingredient that reporters and Mormons and never Mormons are probably missing is Jody Hildebrandt's pathologizing of sexual shame as a really important contributing factor to Ruby's neuroticism, to her ultimate estrangement from Kevin, and to Ruby's estrangement from Chad, her son, and other children. I guarantee that's a factor in Ruby's neuroticism. Why were Ruby and Kevin, Franke, so strict? Again, let's go back to the Mormon Church's teachings on parenting and sexual shame. Heber J. Grant, Mormon prophet, says, no true Latter-day Saint would not rather bury a son or daughter than to have him or her lose his or her chastity, realizing that chastity is more value than anything else in the world. Again,
that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing. Exploring your own body when you're, going through puberty or high school or whatever is not the same thing as losing your virginity. It's not the same thing. Oh my God. This makes me so sad that she, it was bad enough that she was starving her kids, that she was doing all these things to torment her kids. But the fact that she removed all the doors and was defaming them as sexual deviants. I accidentally, walked into my son's room when he was a teenager. And I walked right back out. He wasn't doing anything, fortunately for me. But there were times when I would go in and I'd clean up for him. I'd clean up the room. And I didn't always know if he was there. He didn't always answer when I knocked. That's not the same thing as fucking removing the doors and being like, you can't touch yourself. Not on my watch. This bitch needs to be locked up forever. Oh my God. I can't believe she was doing this to all the boys. All the boys. Russell is the one that escaped. And he's the one that she is blaming of sexually assaulting 20 people. How is that even fucking possible if he had absolutely no privacy? He had no friends. And when he was exploring the neighborhood, they were calling CPS on you. Give me a goddamn break.
Heber J. Grant saying sexual purity is more important than your kids' own lives. So if your kid is better off dying than committing a sexual sin, surely it's justifiable to tie their wrists with duct tape or to tie their ankles in duct tape to deprive them of food or water, to malnourish them, to dehydrate them. If you are doing it in the service of saving their souls from eternal damnation. I guarantee you, sexual shame was at the root of the duct tape, the handcuffs, the isolating of the kids, and the physical torture and the starvation and the dehydration that the kids experienced. Again, David O. McKay, your virtue is worth more than your life. Please, young folk, preserve your virtue even if you lose your lives. Again, I guarantee you by the time this story's over, Ruby will say that Jody had her in such paranoia about her kids and her husband involved in sexual shame that she felt it was better to bind them in duct tape and to imprison them than to risk that they commit further sexual sin. Again, we have Spencer W. Kimball saying it is better to die in defending one virtue than to have lost it without a struggle. And then finally, Gordon B. Hinckley saying, I know what my mother expects. I know that she's saying her prayers. She'd rather have me come home dead than unclean. And again, better that your kids are tortured and imprisoned than unclean. At least that's stopping short of actually murdering your kids. So, other questions that we've tried to answer today. Why was Chad Franke likely kicked out of his room and sleeping on a beanbag chair for 7 months? Why was Chad likely sent to a wilderness camp? I guarantee you, I'm willing to bet that sexual shame, Mormon sexual shame, is at the root of that. What gave Jody Hildebrandt so much power? She was able to terrorize Ruby and Kevin into believing that her kids' souls were going to be destroyed, that they might commit sins worse than murder or almost as bad as murder. And Kevin was probably already committing sins nigh unto murder. That's what gave Jody Hildebrandt her power. Mormon theology and Mormon doctrine around sexual shame. Go back to the beginning if you missed that part. It's the most crucial part of this entire presentation. Why was Kevin Franke alienated from the family? Because Mormon bishops referred Jody Hildebrandt to Mormon couples and Mormon families. Jody Hildebrandt was created by the Mormon Church. Jody Hildebrandt was referred to endless Mormon families by the Mormon Church. Jody Hildebrandt was funded by the Mormon Church, according to Jessie Hildebrandt, Jody's own niece. And so Jody got her power ultimately from the Mormon Church, its doctrine, its theology, and its own referral and financing. That's where Jody Hildebrandt got her power, and that's why Kevin was alienated from the family, and that's why Kevin was terrified to intervene with his children, because he was afraid that Jody would wield the sexual shame within Mormon culture to destroy his life, as Jody Hildebrandt did with Adam Steed. Why were Ruby's siblings possibly so afraid to speak out? Again, because they were afraid and terrorized that they would be stigmatizing the entire family and the kids as possible sexual deviants. That's what I believe the evidence is likely going to show. And then finally, why did Ruby accuse some of her children of abuse? It's because she herself had been terrorized to see sexual addiction everywhere, including in her small children. I would like to end by saying where I believe the Mormon Church is responsible. I believe that the Mormon Church ultimately is responsible for its biblical and Book of Mormon-based teachings around sexual shame. If you didn't have the Bible and the Book of Mormon teaching that sexual sin is next to murder in severity, you would not have many of these problems. Secondly, modern Mormon prophets, Heber J. Grant, Spencer W. Kimball, David O. McKay, Gordon B. Hinckley, most of them have amplified and radicalized these teachings found in the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And then the Mormon Church, by labeling pornography and masturbation use as an addiction, they have popularized and endorsed a completely non-scientific and unethical wholly manufactured treatment of a fake and false and harmful addiction. And they did that before, and they did that by supporting Lifestar. They did that by supporting Sons of Helaman. They did that by supporting Fight the New Drug. And they did that by supporting Jody Hildebrandt and Connections and all the addiction.
Yeah, but you didn't need air quotes around that, because that was like straight up factual, right? You didn't need to do air quotes for that. You could say, like, if you're afraid they're going to sue you, you could say, it is presumed that XYZ, right? You don't need to do the air quotes. That's kind of weird. I don't know.
Recovery programs that they have created and supported either indirectly or directly. Finally, the Mormon Church is responsible for the creation of Jodi Hildebrandt and her multi-million-dollar business around sex addiction and recovery, both because they referred Jodi to endless families and because they funded Jodi for so many years, even after Jodi had lost her license. And then finally, the Mormon Church is responsible, after supporting Jodi, for destroying countless marriages and families and terrorizing generations of couples and children in the process. That is what I hope to share with you today. I hope you found it useful. These are sensitive issues. I'm going to state that so much of what we talked about today is speculation. I'm going to end as I started. We don't have all the information about Jodi and Ruby and Kevin and the children, so I'm speculating, but I would call this informed speculation based on 20 years, based on 6 years as a psychology PhD in training, and having completed my psychology PhD in clinical and counseling psychology, as having worked with Mormons for 20 years, and as having spoken to dozens now of victims of Jodi Hildebrandt. I would call this informed speculation, but let's wait for the evidence, because almost all of this are allegations until they're demonstrated.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's going to go to trial, to be honest. I think that this is going to end up in plea deals, because how do you get around all this bullshit? Jodi and Ruby. And honestly, Kevin, too. I think Kevin's going to get dragged into it. How do you get around all these allegations and all the evidence? That's why I don't think it's going to go to trial. I think that they're going to have to try and work out some plea deals to try and reduce their sentences, which I think they're going to be in for at least 15 years apiece. At least. I mean, they could potentially be facing 90 years, but I think that some of these charges, the judge will express some leniency and have the terms run consecutively, or is that the right term, where they're running at the same time, right? It depends on how cooperative they are, right? And they're probably kind of dragging this out a bit to see who they can get in the Mormon Church, too. Who was making these referrals? Why were these referrals being made? You know, they might be looking at higher catches as well, which is why they'd probably be open to plea deals on this. But these women need to serve some serious time, because what they did was outrageous. And this whole idea of coming after the kids for sexual deviancy, when half of them had never even heard of these terms before. Ruby, Jodi, they didn't even know what masturbation meant. Oh my God. These women are so disgusting. I can't.